Truth. At the end of every video, I mention this as an attempt to take the Coburn Bible further. And I humbly admitted that I could get it wrong and needed to adjust along the way. This video should have been the first. In my book, it would be in the introduction and throughout. However, I had pieces and am on a journey of my own. The videos are only a small fraction of what I'm working with. At best, you might call it a window of sorts. In creativity, we like to get feedback, and much of what I'm doing originates with me. It's emotionally draining at times. Few like looking in a mirror without flinching, and that's the key to this whole riddle, what I wasn't understanding. Ever hear of mirror writing? It was once used as a primitive form of cipher. It's words written backwards that can only be read in a mirror. The reflection of truth. Now, I remember this is also something said to be what people did when channeling the other side. I don't believe that's true, but who knows? I'm only pointing out because another could mention it. I'm not endorsing the view. I'll stick with what I know. I'll let others go where they will. What is true, whatever we create, is based on what God or the Creator created, but with a twist. I do believe in God, even if I don't believe in following books or people blindly as religion tells us to do. So let's get this started. The idea of the Trinity knot was a phrase. In all things, there is a Trinity. One is silent. This changed in 2019 to, in all things, there is a Trinity. Two are illusions, hiding truth. It's this that I need to address before we go further. I talk much of the soul, mind, body. I'm referring to aspects of us, but it's this that is a mirror, the mirror writing. In part 9, I touched in this, but it must be flipped. I ended that video telling you that you need to allow them to see the illusion of one, while you're aware there are three. A violation of the in all things there is a Trinity. Two are illusions, hiding the truth. The rule of blame, rejected cause, and split effect. All of this is talking about human behavior, the rules that have created the distortion even within ourselves. But what we create is backwards, and often in dealing with finding a way to deal with this, the spectrums I'm creating have 5 levels, with one being silent. That is the truth, representing the effect, while cause is an illusion. You see how mirror writing is key? A body is truth, but to understand what is going on around us, we must first perceive 3. We've rejected concept that there can be more than 2, and that means soul must be housed in mind or heart. Ancient Egyptians, having less knowledge, saw the heart as the seat of the soul. Today, having more knowledge, we perceive it's in the mind. The reality is there is one, and the other 2 are illusions. A mind and soul separated is the illusion created by rejection of the lesson. We created blame and placed it in the mind, telling it we must not know something. I talk of Adam and Eve. The reality, it's a focal point. It might teach children the rule of blame, but we create it when traumatized. We must accept soul exists to translate what we are hiding from ourselves. Soul can represent personality or creativity, but fundamentally it is your creative aspect. The mind needs structure. The soul needs to have the possibilities or it won't do anything. That is something many will not do, and they feel they lack control because they seek that control by controlling others. There are 2 lessons it seems we learn early on. Control others, you can take what you want. On my spectrum, to protect needs, I'd place this person as a predator. Control yourself and you can manipulate others. I'd assign this to the professional victim. The spectrum is for your use. It is not meant to judge others. Once you conceive of the human trinity, it is imperative you never forget that there is an illusion, something few that are damaged care about. Intent must matter, and only God knows the intent behind the actions. Society must judge, and when it must, it's best that there be more than one person doing this. Society punishes, God teaches consequences. These videos, my book, the only one likely to seek it is a broken soul on its way to a strong soul, or a strong soul, well established. Others will attack or be unable to make sense of it. Their learned behavior rules have lobotomized the mind into positive or negative answers. They must disown the ideal of doing what's wrong for the greater good. Until this is done, they will thrive on earth, but live in constant fear of all around them, because their mind knows that what it does, others can do. They can get beyond predator professional victim thinking, then you would go into the actual journey through the broken soul, and in time reach the strong soul. Problem is, those first two see it as a weakness because you must travel through the broken soul to get there. Once you're at broken soul, you will not fall lower. The key difference, they will attempt not hurting others, but fundamentally believe they are flawed. In this, they can hurt others. They have yet to see value in themselves. In seeking punishment, they will embrace the bottom two. Then, they might damage from fear. Those three you need to protect your needs from. Being damaged, how much you're going to accept as a strong soul, how much risk in attempting to help others. You could end up offering too much if you're not aware of your major needs being protected. Even a strong soul can damage each other if they still believe themselves worthless. They are challenging the rule, but if they are focused on protecting others, they will fail to protect their needs. If they hurt someone, it will be because you attempt to place them at your level, and they did place you at their level. Unfortunately, their level is below everyone else. Rescuing might be their drug. Just know that I don't believe you can slide further than upper level of broken soul. You have knowledge of how to do it. They only lost self-confidence because they failed to protect their needs. People will tell you they want to change and attempting to help you may fail to realize they only wanted to add what you had. They never intended to give up what they had. When they realize they must, they will lash out at you. When they do, the spectrum of communication will help in realizing you need to lower them down one. They must earn it back. Just be aware at some point, they can do no more. If you're unwilling to risk, it's best you leave. Maybe knowledge you will not slide further will make it easier to attempt moving back into the strong soul area. It is the only one that will reject blame and start dealing with learned behavior rules. The true answer is simple. Know yourself and you will not need to control others. See that a spectrum has 5 marks, and it should be remembered those are only marks. It represents the journey of a soul. Predator, professional victim, broken soul, strong soul, balanced soul. When I first created this spectrum, I perceived predator and professional victim as 2 extremes, and the balanced soul must be in the middle. That didn't consider what I knew to be true. The balanced soul is not going to be found on Earth. If I'm going to be doing this, it must not be a mistake. Eventually, I conceived of the body to represent the spectrum. It's not exactly right, but close enough. Predator and professional victim are the same. If you're damaged, they are the predator. Soul is the creative aspect of us, and having free will always own the good, while our predator is likely seeing themselves as a victim. We are all victims of the rule of blame. It's forced learned behavior rule to cause disruption within us. We need possibilities, but chaos must not create insanity between mind and body, and those learned behavior rules we must implement as children and some as adults cause us to see negative and positive. We are born without learned behavior rules, and when a trauma rule is severe enough, it resets all learned behavior rules. We now have a choice, and it seems like most choose to embrace blame again. Hence, each generation sees the last as predators, while that generation sees themselves as victims. I don't want my children to suffer as I did, or make the same mistakes I did. I don't want to make the same mistakes with my children as my parents did. Sound familiar? Predator and professional victim behavior rules are the strictest and are only slightly less for professional victim. And I am talking about learned behavior effects on us, not marking the soul itself. They represent the legs of the body. They're at the very bottom, even though we see them thriving here. It's because they're in constant terror, pain, traumatized by the learned behavior rules. They are afraid of the chaos, and they need structure, and they will attempt to enforce it on others. The problem with the body rule is broken soul and strong soul should be the arms. But they are not equal. They are, in fact, the journey. The body rule at least got me far enough that I got there in the end. It's what I disowned when I created the spectrum that is a Trinity, and it is professional victim, broken soul, strong soul, that are abuser, victim, and survivor. That's the journey. It's predator and balanced soul that represents the lesson, cause, and effect, the split. But it's at the beginning because it's the aftermath of us choosing to split the soul into two. I missed 2 weeks ago. I missed this 2 weeks ago with a video. I'd intended it to be about communication, but I had difficulties. I now understand sometimes something hits me. In this case, it was a realization that when I started, I wanted a balanced soul to be in the middle. It made sense. It does in the communication spectrum that we created, and this stopped my creativity until I could fully deal with it. I still want to do that video. It is important for those of us that are attempting to challenge others, but part 9 felt more important, and this video is just as important as 9, since I really think I need to deal with the reality that I'm really only talking about learned behavior rules effects on us, and not that they are 3 different people or characters within us. It is imperative that we don't forget that soul and mind are aspects of truth. We see it in others, but to add the soul into our perception of what we are doing, it allows us to see why they are acting as they are. We can compensate for this with time by focusing on what we can change ourselves. It's always been that way. They will not change any attempt to change them. Without their help, will introduce insanity into your life. You'd be perceived as the predator, and they will lash out. I understand doing these videos, and even the book is at odds with that comment. And I do understand I will face at least verbal attacks. And that was what I wanted to deal with on the communication video. How to protect your need there. But first, I need to make sure it's clear that mind and soul are only aspects created by learned behavior rules. There was always supposed to be 2, the spirit and the body. The stuff that you create, it goes into the mind. But when you leave here, the mind and soul will go with it. The brain and the body will remain. So, here we go. We need them much like a person needs glasses, these spectrums and rules. But they are only for our use. I've noticed in talking to people, there seems to be an internal question. Do they need to know? No one needs to know anything. It's a question that limits us to treating even spouses to acquaintance-level communication. Language and perception must be understood for intimacy to succeed. I have a different internal question. Do I care if they know? You almost never care if anyone knows. That is the question to ask if you're attempting intimacy. They must know as much as you can give them because you both are attempting to unify 2 languages into one. We often give family a special level in the spectrum. I disagree. What they are is the first focus group. Once you reach age of maturity, you need to place them on the spectrum. And again, this is talking about access to your needs. You've had the most access to these people, so you have the best ability to decide how much chaos do they cause and how do you need to limit your contact with them. I do not think any of them truly want intimacy level communication, and some will be toxic. If they are rigid or failing all your life to protect themselves and others around them from financial or emotional stress, then place them lower. Your three needs of safety, security, and sanity must be a priority. God gave you a path. You will have to walk it. You will have to impose rules to deal with family. But after you reach adult status in society, you should focus first on placing your family along that spectrum of acquaintance, friend, best friend, and intimate relationships. I add best friend, and most of your family will likely end up there. But it's mainly to protect your needs. If the person you assign the highest access of intimate relationships violate your three needs, financial or emotional security would fall into security for the mind. It does not like chaos. You must protect that aspect from damage, so fear will not make you place behavior rules in panic. Managing fear can't be done unless you first protect those two needs. Insanity will infect you as well as anyone that you would hurt. What I mean by lowering them to best friend status, they may have only violated one of your needs. You can still allow them access to the other two and just limit the one until they violate a second one, and then you will have to make the decision if they need to go down further. If you open it up and give them back another chance and they again betray that one, you need to really decide just exactly what is the cost to you. They clearly are not getting the clue. Telling them will only make it worse for you because they aren't figuring it out. You're not important enough for them to do this. They did it and will assume all others would do the same things to others or to them. It's the most frustrating thing I face. Telling people exactly what I will do, and months later, they leave having finally realized I mean what I say. It's not hypocrisy. If I have to commit hypocrisy, I will own it. And I will, because my moral code would violate my sense of right and wrong. It is the only time that I would take that hit. If the choices are so bad that right and wrong has to overrule my moral code. In that case, I must choose hypocrisy, or doing what I know to be wrong. After focus on why you had to become a hypocrite. If it was imposed, then make peace with it. Own it when talking to others. Don't give them ammunition to throw at you. They will not care your reason, so you will need to be sure. If it's because of a mistake you made in the past, then be watchful for acting before thinking in the future. You can't fix the past, just own it. Events and people will place higher values. Trauma rules that have their own spectrum also will decide how intense a response. All of this is not going to be easy, and most people will not want to be at highest level. The amount of access granted must be based on a spectrum. Remember, the first time you assign access based on a desire, if they violate it, you must demote them, only as far as access to your needs. Far easier to stay with, do they need to know? But it's a wall. It will keep the good as well as the bad out. There'll be no hope for any long-term relationship. Mine is the right question, but it needs a balance. In fact, it needs two spectrums. The spectrum of needs are safety, security, and sanity. What blew my mind was when I realized those three are safety of the body, security for the mind, since it must have structure and predictability. Insanity I labeled as souls, but in truth, it's you. It's truth. All of you. If body and mind does not have this, then chaos will create insanity, with the mind and body seeming to attack the creative element. I've talked about Adam and Eve and the origin of blame. I think it's a good focal point. However, again, there is an oddity that I'm only now getting in concept of Trinity. Adam is the creative aspect. Eve is the mind aspect. God is the missing element. And it was the creation of the Holy Trinity that made me consider the human Trinity. Eve does represent mind and emotions, and inside the body, the mind and soul create a home. Think about it. Soul is always in charge of the Trinity. The authority figure, it doesn't require the authority figure to be a man, only that there must be an authority figure that recognizes an equal. The mind starts out the ally of the adults around them, but at age of possibilities, the creative aspect, I label soul, starts to ask why. Marriage represents the attempting to unify two languages into a common one that allows children to avoid placing coping behavior too soon. However, it does not mean marriage is about having children. It is only about unifying language of perception, something mind and soul must do, and anyone attempting intimacy with another must do this within the human trinity. 4 aspects at different levels is not an easy thing if you haven't yet mastered your own. However, the rule of blame causes a deterioration over generations. The imposed and placed coping behavior makes communication even within families so intense and insane that children must place learned behavior rules at younger ages. That is what we are seeing today and what has worried me since 2012. This seems to happen every 3 decades. Most of us only see this twice in our lifetime. One is the cause and the other the effect. It seems to be every 3 decades, and within 3 decades you have at least 5 generations. My 5 spectrums with the 3 needs. All along, I know every 3 decades there seems to be some instability. How severe depends on many factors, but the foundation of all of this is the 5 generations in society. And that is my journey of a soul, placed over 5 generations. The first generation will be the only one that will act out of a true effort to do good, but they will always seem to embrace blame when raising kids. The phrase is, I don't want my child to suffer, or I want them to have what I didn't have, ignores the reality it was those consequences that taught humility. And denying them consequences at an early age, you haven't protected them, only allowed interest to accrue on a debt that will have to be paid. But we can't be rigid, and I believe it's the Trinity knot that offers the clue, a spectrum. But this must have only 3. Create, test, and place. And that is what is represented in the Adam and Eve myth in Culver Bible. I covered that in 2 earlier videos. This also made me consider the Maya lung count, the so-called 5 worlds. Others talk of this in different ways, and it was believed by the time of the conquest from Spain that we were already well into the 5th world. Consider, could it be talking instead about this spectrum I'm dealing with? The Trinity knot is underpinned with structure that has 5 representing the original Trinity, with cause and effect acting as bookends. Thus, journey of a soul. It's the trauma Trinity that I'm considering the ending of a cycle. We have natural disasters, human disasters like war. The other could be society disaster, since that is the last line of defense against chaos. But labeling does not mean we can assume a set of 3 or 5. It depends heavily on just how fast we react and address the problem. Key is keeping humility, the one thing that seems impossible. Like famine or drought, it must be conserved for bad days to come. Consequences is the only way I know of teaching humility. It is true, the older you become, the more humbled you are, more aware of mortality. You're willing and you need more help. After any disaster, you notice all around you, having lost so much, it is humility that often makes me take charge, even when I'm suffering from trauma rules. Others being hurt will stop the focus being kept on me. There is so much more to what I just said, but I'll have to leave it here. It's this mirror aspect that I didn't take into account with the proposed book that I'm doing. I've had to do some major additions. I had hoped I'd be able to publish at least the first part within the end of the month. But to do it right, I gotta go through everything. So it will take more time. But I thought I would at least show an area that I'm working on that turned out to be rather interesting. I've created a structure for the book. and I call it Puzzle in a Puzzle. I've decided to go over some significant aspects to make each parts significant. The book itself would represent the body of the problem, or the reality we were always to be two, spirit and body. The three parts of this book will represent human Trinity, soul, mind, and body. This 5 will represent my spectrums that I'll be talking about. So 5 and 3 comes up to 8. That represents the distortion of the rule of blame by creating double Trinity to compensate the creative aspect that forced mind to create an illusion of 2 to compensate for the learned behavior rule. So, cause will be soul, mind, and body. Lesson will be effect, mind, brain, and body. So, within the 8 books, there will be 12 chapters, and each book represents the journey of a soul. We start out as 2, and to undo all the damage, we must end with 10 plus 2. The original truth all along, and the end of our journey. It is said it takes 10 generations to undo the damage of 1. 2 sections in each book represents negative and positive, with soul always owning the positive. All this added together comes to 24. 24 hours broken into 8 8-hour days, with 12 representing day and night. This represents the truth and illusion, as well as a meditation of engaging in creativity. 3 is body, soul, and mind. In order, it is God's path. 2 is the result of the break representing both truth and illusion. Soul is missing, so while we have the break, it is an illusion allowing soul, mind, and body 8 hours in a day for its needs to be met, but we only acknowledge it as 12 hours apiece. The first 8 hours in any day is ordered. We usually have things that have to be done right away. That is when the mind's need for structure gets met. The second 8 represents the soul's aspect. It's time to play. It's time to be creative. It's time to do whatever we want. It must be allowed time to relax. The last 8 is for the body's need. While the mind and soul is still active as we dream, the body gets to rest. They entertain themselves in other ways. So this is one day, and we break 7 days into a week, and we break those weeks into months, 12 of them, which goes back into 1 year, broke into decades. 3 decades, 5 generations, half cycle cause. 3 decades, 5 generations, half cycle effect. 6 decades, 10 generations, parity, and a full cycle of 1 life. Live beyond this moment, you're one of the lucky ones. You have the chance of breaking through all the insanity once the consequences are so bad. Because most that didn't make it that far were the only ones that had their learned behavior rules so badly mangled, they weren't capable of listening. You've been granted extra time to fulfill the goal God intended all along, to teach rejection of blame at the end of a full cycle. This, I believe, is the real remnant we often hear of. I believe the first cycle is represented by the creative aspect at its most disabled. The second cycle represents the reaction caused by adults 3 decades before, and the end of the first full cycle. You would have been very young during this part. At the best, you might have been near the 15 years old. If you see the end and say nothing, then you've failed the final test of the few chosen by God to take the final exam. And the reality is we sink or swim together. So you are going to have to overcome not only your own fears, but the reality that some in your own generation that are still around aren't going to like it. That is going to be the part that I want to talk about with the communication aspect of all this. Because if you're going out there and you're trying to get this information out, you're going to need to understand there are certain things that they're going to do when they attack, and you're going to need to compensate so that you don't feed into their need to disable and destroy what you're trying to do.